Some betrayals are loud and obvious. Others hide behind polite voices and everyday routines. For Mira Langston, it began with a casual phone call that exposed everything she had silently endured for years. The rain tapped gently against the windows of her small Portland apartment when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was her mother, Caroline. Mira glanced at the screen, hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hey, Mom." "Oh, Mira, good, you're free. We'll need you here early Friday, around 3, her mother said, her voice brisk. "We've got Evan's promotion dinner, and I want everything set before the guests arrive." Mira blinked, confused. Evan's dinner party. This Friday. Of course, Caroline replied. It's a big step for him. His manager and a few senior partners will be there. We're doing a full spread in the dining room, so I'll need your help with the table and maybe some appetizers. Mira paused. Am I invited? There was a brief silence on the other end. Then her mother chuckled. Oh, honey. It's not really that kind of gathering. It's mostly Evan's colleagues. You know how those things are, formal, a bit stiff. You wouldn't enjoy it. Mira said nothing for a moment. Not invited. Not even considered. But you still want me to set the table? She asked, her voice flat. Yes, and make sure the wine glasses are spotless this time. The last time, there were streaks. A breath caught in Mira's throat. The same pattern. Every event. Every time. She did the work. Evan got the applause. And she disappeared before the guests arrived. Sure, she said quietly. What time again? 3 sharp. And could you bring those cloth napkins? The blue ones with the trim. You always remember where we keep those. Mira ended the call with a quiet goodbye. Her mother did not notice she hadn't said it back. For several minutes, Mira sat motionless, the low hum of the city outside her window offering the only sound. She was 34 years old, living on her own, running her own consulting business. And yet, in her family's eyes, she remained the go-to helper, the reliable shadow behind the spotlight. Her phone buzzed again. A push notification from an app she hadn't opened in months. A table for one. Casa Lumo. Friday at 7:30. Her favorite place. Warm lights. Handwritten menus. Red wine that warmed her chest. She stared at the screen. Then, without a second thought, she tapped reserve. Let them handle it. The days leading to Friday were a blur of texts from her mother. Instructions, reminders, lists. Don't forget the charger plates. Bring the rosemary sprigs. Have you pressed the napkins? Mira didn't respond. Not once. By Friday morning, Caroline called again. Mira, you'll be here by 3, right? Mira hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Don't worry, Mom. I've taken care of it. Caroline sighed with relief. Oh, thank goodness. You always know just how to make things beautiful. I honestly don't know how we'd manage without you. As her mother hung up, Mira stood in front of her closet. She reached for a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, and laid it on the bed. Then she sat down and began to curl her hair. That afternoon, while her family assumed she was heading to the suburbs, Mira walked down wet cobblestone streets, the city lights starting to glow against the misty sky. She entered Casa Lumo at exactly 7:30. Table for one? The host asked kindly. Yes, she said with a soft smile. Back in the Langston house, the chaos had begun. The table was half set. The candles were missing. The appetizers untouched. Caroline paced in the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply on the tiles. Where is she? she muttered. She said she'd be here. She probably flaked again, Evan said with a shrug as he adjusted his collar in the hallway mirror. Honestly, why do you even rely on her? Caroline glared. Because she's the only one who ever helps. Then maybe you should have invited her, James Langston muttered under his breath. No one heard him. At Casa Lumo, Mira sipped red wine while a quiet jazz tune played from the corner speaker. The waiter brought fresh bread and rosemary butter. She felt a weight lifting, one she hadn't even realized she'd carried for so long. Her phone buzzed inside her purse. She didn't reach for it. Somewhere across the river, her mother was boiling over. But Mira wasn't there to absorb it anymore. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel guilty. As the first course arrived, a creamy mushroom risotto, Mira leaned back, her shoulders relaxing. The tension in her jaw began to ease. Outside, the rain was steady. Inside, the air was warm, the lighting golden. She had chosen herself. And she wasn't going back. Not this time. Not ever again. The Langston house buzzed with misplaced urgency. Caroline stood at the center of it all, voice sharp, hands trembling as she checked her watch for the third time. It was now 3:45. No sign of Mira. The dining table sat half-dressed, candles still boxed, wine glasses gathering dust, silverware mismatched. Evan, newly promoted and far too pleased with himself, leaned against the wall scrolling through his phone, unbothered by the chaos. I told you, he said without looking up. She's unreliable. Probably forgot or got distracted. James Langston gave his son a sideways glance but said nothing. He had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the man who let Caroline manage everything until it spiraled. Today, it was already spiraling. Upstairs, the guests began to arrive. A silver sedan pulled into the driveway, followed by a sleek black car with tinted windows. Suits stepped out, laughter spilling onto the walkway. Brian's co-workers, his boss, and his boss's wife, all punctual. All expecting perfection. Caroline forced a smile onto her face as she opened the front door. Welcome. Come in. Please excuse the last-minute flurry. We're just putting the final touches on things. But the tension was thick. The living room lights were too dim. The hallway still cluttered with unopened wine crates. The scent of uncooked appetizers clung to the air instead of the warm welcome she had imagined. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Mira dipped a spoon into her soup. Velvety butternut squash with a drizzle of cream. She hadn't tasted something so comforting in months. Across the restaurant, couples laughed quietly, servers moved like gentle waves, and the clatter of cutlery blended with soft conversation. She felt invisible, but in a good way. Not like home, where invisibility meant being forgotten. Here, it meant freedom. Her phone buzzed again. 8 missed calls. 9 messages. She didn't look. She didn't need to. At the Langston house, panic gave way to resentment. Caroline paced the dining room like a general before a battle. She said she'd take care of this, she whispered to James. The candles, the napkins, the wine decanting, none of it's ready. James said nothing. But he noticed the messages on his own phone. None were from Mira. Evan poured himself a drink and flopped into the corner armchair, legs crossed, entirely unbothered. Caroline snapped, "Do you even care? This is your dinner." I showed up. That's more than Mira can say. James stood up, calm but firm. That's enough. Your sister's not a servant. The sentence landed heavy in the air. Back at Casa Lumo, Mira was finishing her entree, a pan-seared sea bass with roasted lemon and capers. The waiter offered her a second glass of wine, and for the first time in ages, she said yes. She leaned back in her chair, savoring the simple pleasure of being alone but not lonely. The air smelled of rosemary and garlic, not stress and disappointment. No one needed anything from her. No one expected her to clean up a mess. No one forgot to invite her while still handing her a list of tasks. She was just Mira. A woman dining alone. A woman finally seen by herself. In the Langston kitchen, James was lighting the candles by hand while Caroline barked at Evan to plate the appetizers. "I don't even know where the rosemary is," Evan groaned. "Didn't she say she was bringing it?" "She did." "She did," Caroline muttered. "You didn't invite her," James said without looking up. "But you expected her to act like staff." Caroline turned sharply, mouth open to retort, but something in James's face made her stop. He wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired of watching Mira get used. Tired of watching his wife justify it. The guests tried to be polite. But Caroline saw it, the glances toward the unlit candles, the untouched wine, the wrinkles in the linen. They noticed. And she noticed them noticing. One guest finally leaned over and said to Evan, "Nice promotion. But this dinner feels a bit rushed." That was the moment. The moment the weight of Mira's absence stopped being a minor inconvenience and became a glaring mistake. Later that night, as Mira took a bite of cheesecake dusted with shaved dark chocolate, she finally opened her phone. Message after message. Her mother. Her brother. Even her father. She scrolled slowly. "Where are you? Everything's falling apart. You promised. You're being selfish. Please call back. We need you. Asterisk we're sorry. Can we talk? Asterisk." Mira read the final one, a quiet text from her father. Asterisk we shouldn't have assumed. "I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." Asterisk. She didn't reply. Not yet. She stared out the window, the rain blurring the city lights. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity. A woman choosing herself after years of being chosen for everything else. And as the waiter brought her the check, she folded the message in her mind and tucked it away. Something was changing. Slowly. Imperfectly. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to her. The next morning, Mira woke to quiet. Not the silence of avoidance, but the kind of stillness that came after a decision had settled into the bones. She lay in bed for a few extra minutes, watching the soft gray light seep through the curtains. Outside, the Portland rain had slowed to a gentle mist, casting a silver sheen across the windows. She made coffee slowly, deliberately. No rush. No obligations. For once, there were no to-do lists waiting in her inbox. No errands dictated by someone else's emergency. Just the hum of her apartment and the faint memory of last night's risotto. Then her phone buzzed. One new message. It was from her father. Asterisk call me when you're ready. No pressure. I just want to talk. Asterisk. She stared at the words, unsure whether to feel guilt, relief, or both. But she didn't respond. Not yet. At the Langston house, the atmosphere was subdued. The dinner party had ended in awkward smiles, stiff handshakes, and guests leaving earlier than expected. The feedback was polite, but Caroline had caught every subtle cue, missed beats in conversation, glances at the unpolished setting, and Evan's boss leaving without dessert. Now, the house was quiet, except for the occasional clang of dishes being put away and the soft rumble of the dishwasher. James stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a pan with slow, heavy strokes. Caroline sat at the breakfast bar, a cold cup of coffee between her hands. Evan had already left, something about brunch with friends and needing a reset. Neither James nor Caroline mentioned Mira's name until the silence demanded it. She didn't even respond, Caroline finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. James rinsed the pan and set it in the drying rack. Would you have, if you were her? Caroline flinched. I didn't think she'd just, not show. She did show, he said. Just not for you. She looked at him, confused. She showed up for herself. And frankly, I think that took more courage than we ever gave her credit for. Back in her apartment, Mira sat on the edge of her bed, holding her phone in both hands. She could feel her father's message pulling at her, gentle and persistent. She didn't want to be cold. But she also didn't want to fold. She opened the text, reread it, then finally typed 3 words. Can we talk? The response came within seconds. Anytime. I'm here, They agreed to meet that afternoon at a small cafe near the waterfront. Mira arrived early, nerves thrumming beneath her calm expression. She chose a table by the window, the rain giving the glass a soft blur. The world outside looked quieter, slower, like it was holding its breath with her. James arrived 5 minutes later, carrying an umbrella and wearing a look Mira hadn't seen before. Not stern. Not paternal. Just, present. He sat down gently and offered a tired smile. Hi. Hi. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mira said, I didn't do it to hurt you. I know, James replied. You did it to protect yourself. She exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. I'm sorry, he said, folding his hands on the table. For letting it go on this long. For watching your mother and Evan lean on you without ever asking if you were okay. I should have stepped in years ago. Mira stared at her coffee. It wasn't just them. I allowed it. I said yes every time. I didn't think I had the right to say no. You always had the right, James said softly. We just didn't make space for it. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the clink of spoons and the hush of distant traffic. I wasn't invited, Mira said finally, her voice barely audible. Not even considered. James's expression faltered. I know. That was the worst part. They talked for almost an hour. Not everything was resolved. But it didn't need to be. It was enough to start. As they stood to leave, James gently rested a hand on her shoulder. I'll talk to your mother. She needs to hear this too. Mira nodded, unsure if she believed it would matter. But grateful, nonetheless. That night, as she sat alone in her living room with a blanket over her legs and a book on her lap, Mira felt the quiet shift again, not from absence, but from realignment. Something had tilted. Something was beginning. Her phone buzzed once more. It was from Leah. Tell me everything. Are you alive? Did the house explode? Mira chuckled and typed back, not yet. But it was close, Wine and gossip tomorrow, Leah responded. Mira smiled. Absolutely. Outside, the rain had returned. But it no longer felt like something pressing down on her. It felt like something washing her clean. 2 days after the dinner party fallout, Mira stood at the counter of a bustling coffee shop near her parents' neighborhood. She wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But her hands stayed wrapped tightly around the ceramic mug as she waited for the door to open. Her mother had agreed to meet. That alone was progress, even if Mira didn't know what version of Caroline would walk through the door, defensive, dismissive, or finally listening. When Caroline arrived, she was dressed in her usual pressed blouse and beige trench coat, posture rigid, lips pursed. She spotted Mira and approached quickly, setting her purse on the table before sitting down. Her tone was brisk. I didn't expect you to reach out so soon. I didn't do it for you, Mira replied evenly. I did it because I needed to say some things. And you need to hear them. Caroline's eyebrows twitched. I'm listening. Mira took a breath. You didn't invite me to Evan's dinner. Not as a guest. Not even as an afterthought. You asked me to come early and set the table. Like always. Like I'm not part of this family, just the help. Her mother flinched, just slightly. That wasn't my intention. It never is, Mira said, voice rising just enough to draw glances from nearby tables. But it keeps happening. Birthdays. Holidays. Promotions. I'm always the one setting up, cleaning, running errands. And then disappearing before the guests arrive. Do you even realize what that feels like? Caroline glanced away, watching people pass through the window. You've always been good at those things. Reliable. Organized. I thought you liked helping. Mira shook her head slowly. I liked being included. I liked being seen. But what you saw was someone to make things easier for you, not someone who deserved a seat at the table. A pause stretched between them, thick with all the unspoken years that came before. I made a reservation for myself that night, Mira continued. At my favorite restaurant. Table for one. And while you were scrambling with the appetizers and mismatched cutlery, I had a glass of wine and tiramisu and didn't feel invisible. Caroline's eyes dropped. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. She looked smaller than usual, as if her confidence had collapsed under the weight of Mira's words. I'm not saying I'll never help again, Mira said more softly now. But I won't be taken for granted. Not anymore. Caroline finally looked up, her voice unsteady. You're right. I didn't realize how much I expected without appreciation. I just assumed you'd always be there. That's exactly the problem. I'm sorry, Caroline whispered. And for the first time in a long time, Mira believed her. They sat there for a few minutes without speaking. Not every wound needed a dramatic gesture. Sometimes all it needed was stillness, space, and the courage to be honest. As they parted ways, Mira didn't hug her mother. But she didn't feel angry either. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of something she never thought she'd see, acknowledgement. That evening, Leah showed up at Mira's door with a bottle of wine and 2 cartons of takeout. I want the full story, she declared, collapsing onto Mira's couch like she lived there. Mira poured them both a glass. Well, my father apologized. My mother said I was right. I think I broke the universe. Leah grinned. You mean you finally stopped being the family doormat? About time. Mira laughed. It feels weird. Good weird. Quiet weird. So what's next? Leah asked, digging into a box of noodles. Mira leaned back against the couch. I don't know. For once, I'm not rushing to fix anything. I'm just seeing what happens. The next morning, Mira received a text from Caroline. We're planning a small gathering next month. Would you like to attend? As a guest, Mira stared at it for a while. There was no pressure. No to-do list. Just an invitation. She typed back, I'd love to. Thank you for asking, Later that week, she visited her parents' house for the first time since everything had happened. She wasn't there to clean. She wasn't there to organize. She walked in, and the table was already set. Her father smiled from the kitchen. Her mother offered her tea. Even Evan, though still self-absorbed and distracted, greeted her with less edge. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a place where she disappeared. It felt like a place where she was beginning to be seen. As the evening wore on and laughter floated through the hallways, Mira sat back in her chair and watched the flicker of candlelight on the walls. Nothing was perfect. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't have to be. She had finally claimed her seat at the table. And she wasn't giving it back. The days that followed felt strangely light, as if Mira had set down a suitcase she'd forgotten she was carrying. It wasn't that everything changed overnight. Her mother still sent texts with too many exclamation marks. Evan still posted selfies about his grind set. But something unspoken had shifted. A door had creaked open. And for the first time in years, Mira wasn't walking on eggshells just to keep the family machine running. It was a Saturday morning when the next test came. A group chat popped up on her phone, created by Caroline, titled Langston Family Brunch. Mira's thumb hovered over the screen before opening it. The message was simple, thinking of doing brunch next Sunday. Evan will be in town again. We'd love for everyone to join. Mira, would you like to come? No responsibilities, just enjoy, She reread the last sentence twice. It felt foreign. Almost clumsy. But sincere. Mira typed her reply carefully, thanks. I'll come as long as I don't have to bring anything but myself, Deal, Caroline replied. Then a smile emoji. It was awkward. But it was something. The week passed quietly. Mira threw herself into work, booked a yoga class, and even had dinner with Leah, who teased her mercilessly about being the boundary queen of Portland. Tell me, Leah said between bites of sushi, what does it feel like to finally stop being the family's unpaid event planner? Mira smiled. Peaceful. Like breathing in a bigger room. By Sunday, she was ready, but cautious. She chose a simple outfit, something soft and neutral. No apron. No emergency purse filled with stain remover pens and extra napkins. Just her. When she pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, the first thing she noticed was the sound. Not frantic yelling or last-minute vacuuming. Just music, light jazz coming from the open windows. Her father opened the door. Hey, sweetheart. Inside, the house looked warm and lived in. The dining table was already set, slightly uneven but clearly done without Mira's guiding hand. Caroline was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes and humming to herself. No chaos. No barking orders. Just, breakfast. Mira stepped inside slowly, half expecting someone to shove a tray of appetizers into her arms. Instead, Caroline turned and smiled. Coffee's fresh. Mugs are in the cabinet. Sit wherever you like. Mira poured herself a cup and joined her father at the table. Evan was already seated, talking loudly about a new project. He barely acknowledged her, but at least he didn't ask her to do anything. For most of the meal, Mira simply listened. The clatter of forks, the smell of butter, the soft laughter between her parents, it all felt oddly familiar and unfamiliar at once. She wasn't managing anything. She wasn't fixing anyone's mess. She was just there. At one point, Caroline brought over a small plate of fruit and placed it in front of Mira. Thought you'd like this. I remembered you don't like heavy food in the morning. Mira blinked. That felt new. Or maybe just long forgotten. Thanks, she said quietly. After the dishes were cleared, by someone else, James turned to Mira. Your mom told me you're thinking of traveling. Mira nodded. I've been looking at Greece. Or maybe southern Italy. Somewhere with sunlight and silence. Caroline's eyes widened. Really? You've never traveled alone before? I've never let myself think about it seriously before, Mira replied. There was a pause. Then Caroline said, I hope you go. You deserve that. Mira didn't know what to say. She just nodded, lips pressed together, heart thudding. When brunch ended, Caroline didn't hand her a list. James didn't ask for help moving boxes. Evan didn't leave dirty plates for her to clean. Mira picked up her purse and walked to the door. Before she stepped out, Caroline touched her arm. I'm trying, she said quietly. It might not look perfect, but I am. Mira met her mother's eyes. I know. And I see it. Driving home, Mira rolled down the window and let the breeze in. She thought of all the versions of herself she had been in this house, quiet child, dutiful teen, forgotten adult. But today, she had just been Mira. Not a helper. Not a filler. Not a role. Just her name. Just herself. And that, finally, was enough. Mira's apartment was quiet that night, lit only by the glow of a single lamp and the soft flicker of streetlights beyond her window. She sat on her couch wrapped in a blanket, her laptop open but untouched. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no emails were being answered tonight. She wasn't in work mode. She wasn't in fixer mode. She was simply still. The brunch had left her unsettled, but not in a bad way. More like a foundation shifting beneath her feet. For so long, she had moved within a rigid identity, an expected role etched into family tradition. But now, the space she occupied was changing. And she was both excited and uncertain about what came next. She sipped her tea slowly, then reached for her notebook. Mira had always kept one near, filled with grocery lists, appointment reminders, event timelines. But this time, she turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote 3 words in careful script. Places I want to see. Then, below that, she started listing. Santorini. Kyoto. Lisbon. Bruges. Queenstown. Places with history, quiet beauty, and enough distance to feel like freedom. She didn't know when she'd go. Or how. But writing it down felt like a declaration. The next morning, Mira walked to her favorite bookstore downtown. It was tucked into a corner brick building with creaky wooden floors and a bell that jingled when the door opened. She wandered through the travel section, running her fingers along the spines of books with covers that promised adventure and escape. She picked out one, Coastal Walks of Italy, and carried it to the counter. As the cashier scanned it, he smiled. Planning a trip. Planning a life, Mira replied before she could think better of it. He raised an eyebrow, impressed. Well, that sounds even better. Back outside, the sky was overcast, the Portland air crisp and damp. Mira pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, the book in one hand, and headed toward the waterfront. Her phone buzzed. A text from Leah. *You free tonight? I'm bringing wine. I want updates. Especially if Evan exploded yet, *. Mira chuckled. Come after 6. But no Evan talk until I get cheese, *. Leah arrived precisely at 6:30, bearing 2 bottles and a brown paper bag filled with crackers, olives, and brie. They sat on the floor of Mira's living room, legs stretched out, glasses in hand. The conversation bounced between light gossip and heavier confessions. I'm proud of you, Leah said at one point, more serious now. I've seen you dim your lights so many times just to keep other people comfortable. But lately, it's like you've stopped apologizing for taking up space. Mira stared into her wineglass. I'm trying. I don't want to vanish anymore. You never should have had to, Leah said. But I'm glad you're finding your way back to yourself. They toasted quietly. To freedom. To boundaries. to starting over, even in the middle of life. The next day, Mira's phone rang. It was James again. "Hey," he said warmly. "I know this is short notice, but we're thinking of repainting the back deck. Thought it might be a good excuse for a family afternoon. No expectations, just some brushes, pizza, and sun." Mira hesitated. "I know what you're thinking," James added. "You don't have to come. But if you do, we'll be glad to have you there, with a paintbrush or without one." She smiled. "I'll think about it." That Saturday, she arrived with sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't bring tools. She didn't bring a list. She brought herself. And when she got there, the deck was half done, music was playing, and Caroline greeted her with a chilled drink and a sun umbrella. "We saved you a chair," her mother said. "Not a chore. Not a tray. Not a task. A chair." And when Mira sat down, it didn't feel like rebellion anymore. It felt like balance. Later that afternoon, Evan sat beside her with a slice of pizza. "So I heard you're jetting off somewhere exotic soon." "Maybe," Mira said, keeping it vague. He nodded. "Good for you." It wasn't much. But it was the first time in years he had acknowledged she had a life beyond being available to him. When the sun began to lower, casting golden stripes across the wood planks, Mira leaned back and closed her eyes. The deck wasn't done. The paint wasn't perfect. But she was here. And so was something else, something subtle but real. The beginning of being seen as a whole person, not just a role to be played. Not just a name in the family group chat. But Mira. Just Mira. Tuesday came with unexpected calm. The sky was unusually clear for Portland in early November, and Mira found herself pulled outdoors without knowing exactly where she was going. Her steps guided her along familiar sidewalks, past cafes and corner stores she rarely noticed, until she ended up at Chapman Square, a small city park framed by old trees and winding benches. She sat down under a tall maple, its golden leaves fluttering down around her. People passed, mothers with strollers, a man juggling in the corner, students with earbuds and coffee, but Mira remained still. She opened her book, not to read, but to hold something in her hands while her mind wandered. It was strange, she thought, how long she had accepted a version of herself curated by others. Helpful. Quiet. Accommodating. Always the one who said yes. Always the one who adjusted. And how little room that left for wondering what she actually wanted. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. This time she checked. A single text from her mother. "Can I ask you something?" Mira frowned slightly, fingers hovering over the screen. She replied, "Sure." Caroline's response came quickly. What did we do that made you feel like you didn't matter? I mean, I think I know. But I want to understand it the way you lived it, Mira stared at the words, her chest tightening unexpectedly. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't a half apology. It was a question. A real one. She thought about how to answer. Then she typed slowly, deliberately. You didn't say it out loud. But every time I wasn't invited, just expected to help, every time Evan's needs came first, even when mine were urgent, every time I did everything right and no one noticed unless it went wrong. It told me my value was in what I could do for you. Not in who I was, The message sent. Caroline's reply didn't come right away. And Mira didn't wait for it. She closed her phone and leaned her head back against the bench. A few feet away, a little girl twirled in a circle, her laughter rising in the crisp air. Mira smiled faintly. There was a freedom in that motion she envied. A total absence of worry about who was watching or what anyone expected. She stayed there longer than she meant to, until the shadows lengthened and the wind picked up. As she stood to leave, her phone buzzed again. Thank you for telling me. I didn't know it hurt that deep. But I believe you. And I'll keep trying. That night, Mira opened her closet and pulled down an old suitcase. She laid it on the bed, unzipped it, and ran her hand across the fabric lining. It still smelled faintly of cedar and something floral. She didn't book a flight. Not yet. But she opened her laptop and bookmarked 3 options. Italy, Portugal, Morocco. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine not just going, but going alone. No explaining. No coordinating. Just walking through unknown streets with no one else's checklist in her pocket. A few days later, she had dinner at her parents' house again. It wasn't an event. No guests. No candles. Just a family meal with roasted chicken, potatoes, and a bottle of wine her father had saved. She arrived to find the table already set. Caroline handed her a glass. Sit. Relax. James already opened the wine. As they ate, Evan droned on about a presentation he nailed earlier that week. Mira listened, nodding politely, but her mind was elsewhere, on warm coastlines and quiet train rides and cups of espresso she would sip without sharing. At one point, Caroline asked her, "Do you know when you'll go?" Mira looked up, surprised. "Go where?" "Wherever you're dreaming of," her mother replied. "I don't know yet," Mira said slowly. "But I will." And Caroline nodded. "Then I hope it's everything you want." Later that night, as Mira walked to her car beneath a sky full of stars, her mother followed her outside. "I wanted to say one more thing," Caroline said, wrapping her sweater tighter against the chill. "I've been thinking about what you said. About only being noticed when things went wrong. I'm sorry I made you feel that way. You deserved better." Mira looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and hugged her. Not out of habit. But choice. "Thank you," she whispered. Caroline didn't say anything else. She just held on a little longer than usual. Mira drove home with the windows cracked open, the cold air clearing her head. For once, it wasn't about fixing. Or proving. Or earning space. She wasn't the assistant. Or the shadow. Or the glue holding a family together. She was a woman with a suitcase on her bed and a passport waiting to be stamped. And she was beginning to understand that the most powerful kind of change is the one that happens quietly, when nobody is watching. By the following weekend, Mira had narrowed her travel choices to 2 cities, Lisbon and Florence. One promised tiled alleyways and fado music drifting from open balconies. The other, a warm sun over Renaissance rooftops and markets filled with stories. It was no longer just a fantasy scribbled in a notebook. It was becoming real. Tangible. Like her name on a boarding pass waiting to be printed. She had her passport ready, her schedule cleared, and her phone filled with travel notes and bookmarked blogs. But even as excitement built, a quiet nervousness settled into her chest. Not fear of the world outside, but of what might be left behind. That Sunday, as she folded laundry with the windows open and a breeze carrying autumn into her apartment, her phone rang. It was her mother. "Hi," Mira answered, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Hi, sweetheart," Caroline said, her voice gentle. "We're organizing a donation drive at the community center next Saturday. I wasn't sure if you'd be interested, but I wanted to ask. Not assume." Mira blinked, surprised by the phrasing. She exhaled softly. "Thank you for asking," she said. "But I have plans that day." "All right," Caroline replied. No guilt. No pushback. Just space. A moment passed before her mother added, "You really are leaving soon, aren't you?" "Maybe," Mira said, smiling. "I haven't booked it yet. But I think I will. I need this." "I know," Caroline said. "And I want you to go. I mean that." After they hung up, Mira stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied her own reflection. She didn't look different. Same hair. Same eyes. Same steady calm in her face. But something inside her had shifted so profoundly it was almost visible. That afternoon, she met Leah for coffee at a local greenhouse cafe filled with vines and the scent of rosemary and soil. They sat by the window, sunlight dappling the floor between them. "I can't believe you're actually doing it," Leah said, sipping her lavender latte. "You, Mira Langston, are officially planning a solo trip. With no one to impress, no one to serve, and no spreadsheet." Mira laughed. "Don't get ahead of yourself. There will be a spreadsheet. Just for me." Leah grinned. "As long as it's not color-coded for your mother." Mira grew quiet, twirling her spoon. "She's trying. I never thought I'd see it, but she is." "Trying doesn't always mean succeeding," Leah said. "But it's a start." Mira nodded. "And I'm learning to accept that, too." That night, back in her apartment, Mira stared at the open suitcase again. It was still empty. But now it felt like a promise. Not of escape, but of expansion. Later in the week, she visited her parents' house one more time. Caroline greeted her at the door with a hug that didn't feel rehearsed. James was outside watering the plants. The house smelled like vanilla and fresh rosemary. They had dinner on the patio, under string lights that flickered gently in the breeze. No one mentioned family obligations. No one assigned her a task. Mira told them stories about the places she wanted to visit. About a little inn in the hills outside Florence. About a bakery in Alfama that only locals knew. James raised a glass. "To wherever this next season leads you." They clinked glasses, and for a moment, Mira felt something rare, a family gathering with no performance, no weight. Just presence. Later, as she helped clear plates, not because it was expected but because she chose to, her mother stood beside her at the sink. "I used to think you helping all the time meant you loved us," Caroline said, rinsing a bowl. "But now I understand it sometimes meant you didn't feel like you could say no." Mira looked at her quietly, the water running between them. "I'm sorry for that," Caroline added. "You deserved more space." "You're giving it to me now," Mira said. Caroline nodded. "I just hope I'm not too late." Mira dried the last plate and set it down gently. "You're not. But I'm not staying where I was either." The drive home was quiet. The city lights shimmered on the river. Mira pulled into her apartment lot, parked, and sat for a moment with the engine off, hands on the wheel. She opened her phone and pulled up her bookmarked links. Then, with steady fingers, she clicked "Book Now" on the Florence flight. No hesitation. No permission needed. Just one name on the ticket. Mira. The day Mira left Portland, it wasn't with grand farewells or a tearful send-off. There were no banners, no hugs at the gate, no social media posts announcing a journey. It was quiet. Just the way she wanted it. She packed light, 2 sweaters, walking shoes, a worn leather journal, and a single photo of herself as a child, taken in her parents' garden with dandelion seeds floating around her like little parachutes. Back then, she hadn't known what it meant to be needed. She had only known how to be free. Her flight to Florence left just after sunrise. As the plane lifted through the mist and broke above the clouds, Mira looked out the window, watching the world shrink beneath her. Portland became a blur of memory. Her family, her obligations, her carefully managed self, all of it fading into a soft, distant light. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She just breathed. 12 hours later, the plane touched down in Italy. The air was warmer than she expected, even in late autumn. Mira stepped out of the airport and into a different rhythm of life. There was no rush. People moved slowly, conversations lingered in doorways, and laughter came easily from cafes. She checked into a small inn on the edge of the city, nestled behind a grove of olive trees. The walls were stone, the windows tall and draped with linen, and her room smelled faintly of citrus and old wood. It was quiet, unassuming. Perfect. That evening, Mira wandered the cobbled streets of Florence alone. No map. No goal. Just footsteps echoing through alleys older than the country she'd come from. She found herself in front of a dimly lit trattoria. A small chalkboard outside read, Vino Rosso e Silenzio. Red wine and silence. She smiled and stepped inside. The waiter greeted her in Italian. She responded in broken phrases, laughter easing the awkwardness. She ordered pasta with truffle oil and a glass of local wine. The table beside her was occupied by an elderly couple sharing one dish, talking quietly, their fingers brushing occasionally like it was the first time. Mira didn't feel alone. She felt untouched. At peace. Back home, Caroline opened a kitchen drawer looking for the old family recipe cards. As she rifled through, she found a note tucked between them, handwritten, addressed to her. She unfolded it carefully. Mom. I'm not running away. I'm running toward. I don't need anyone to chase me. I just need you to remember that I'm not who I used to be. I'm learning to be whole without asking permission. I'll be okay. I hope you will be too. Mira. Caroline stood still for a long moment, the silence of the house pressing around her. She sat at the kitchen table, the note resting beneath her hands, the words sinking in. She thought of all the times she'd called Mira without asking how she was. All the holidays Mira had made perfect while everyone else took credit. All the unspoken moments she had filled with labor, silence, and patience. And how Mira had finally stopped asking for a seat, and built her own table somewhere else. That night, Caroline walked into the den where James was reading. She's gone, she said softly. She really left. James didn't look up. Good. Caroline blinked. Good. She finally chose herself. That's not something we should mourn. Caroline lowered herself into the chair across from him. She held the note in her lap like it was something sacred. I just hope she knows she can come back. She will, James said. But not to be who she was. Only as who she is now. In Florence, Mira walked along the Arno River as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The sky turned lavender and gold, and the street lamps flickered one by one. She didn't check her phone. She didn't take a photo. She just kept walking, feet light, heart full. Behind her was a life she had given everything to. Ahead of her was something unnamed. And for the first time in her adult life, Mira wasn't waiting for anyone to define it for her. She would make it what she wanted. In her own time. In her own voice. And in a language only she needed to understand. It had been 3 weeks since Mira arrived in Florence. Her days had slipped into a gentle rhythm, early morning walks through quiet gardens, afternoons sketching in her journal by the river, evenings sipping coffee in tucked-away cafes where no one knew her name. There were no obligations, no scheduled calls, no lingering guilt when she chose silence over conversation. She had stopped checking her emails after the first week. Leah had sent a message that read only, "You were right to go. I can see it in your silence." Mira hadn't replied. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally trusted that she didn't need to explain her piece to anyone. One afternoon, she found herself sitting at a long wooden table in the courtyard of a hillside library just outside the city. It overlooked the valley below, where cypress trees swayed and the breeze carried the scent of rosemary and clay. A book rested open in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She was simply watching the way the light played on the stone walls, how the shadows lengthened as the sun began its descent. A voice interrupted her stillness. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up to see a woman about her age, curly dark hair pulled into a bun, a small satchel slung across her chest. "Of course," Mira said, smiling. They sat in silence for a few minutes before the woman spoke again. "You look like someone who just let go of something very heavy." Mira chuckled softly. "I suppose I did." The woman offered her hand. "I'm Kalia." "Mira." They shook hands, and for the next hour, shared stories of lost jobs, estranged parents, dreams deferred and then reawakened. Kalia had left her life in Montreal after a divorce and 2 decades working in corporate strategy. She was here studying old textiles. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "You don't need a reason to begin again," Kalia said. "Just space to do it." That night, Mira walked home beneath the stars. The innkeeper had left a pot of tea at her door, along with a small note written in delicate handwriting. "You seem lighter today." Mira smiled and carried the tea to the terrace. She sat beneath the trailing jasmine, listening to the soft hum of the countryside. There was no one to impress. No one to serve. Only herself, and that was more than enough. Back in Portland, Caroline opened a box in the attic she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old drawings Mira had done as a child, crayon maps of imagined cities, lists of places she wanted to go, stories about a girl who could fly. She sat cross-legged on the floor, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't understood then. But she was beginning to now. She picked up her phone and typed a message. "Wherever you are, I hope you found the place you drew as a little girl." Then, after a long pause, she added, "And if you did, I'm so glad you didn't wait for us to give you permission." She didn't press send. Not yet. She just saved it. In Florence, Mira stood before a small shop window displaying handmade journals. She walked inside and bought a leather-bound one, smoother and thinner than her last. The shopkeeper asked if it was a gift. "No," Mira said, her smile soft. "It's for something I'm about to start." That evening, she sat at the cafe by the Duomo and began to write, not about what she had escaped, but what she was building. Not just freedom, but a home within herself. A table where she could sit without shrinking. A life without applause, but full of meaning. The world hadn't changed. She had. And from this quiet corner of a faraway city, Mira Langston finally gave herself everything no one else ever had. Not because they offered. But because she stopped waiting for them to. And chose herself instead.